The letter came from a lawyer I'd never met, telling me my son had $12 million sitting in a bank account he built without ever once mentioning it to me. That wasn't the part that broke something in my chest, though. What broke me was watching my wife of 31 years turn to me that same night, when I told her about the cough I couldn't shake and the mass the doctor was worried about, and say, "Ask Melissa. She's the teacher. She's got a steady paycheck. Not Richard. Not the son sitting on $12 million. Her advice was to go beg the daughter who made $41,000 a year teaching 4th grade. I was 58 years old, sitting at my own kitchen table, and I didn't say a single word back to Caroline that night. I just sat there and let it settle into my chest like a stone I'd swallowed whole. But before I tell you what happened after, you should understand something. This was never a story about money. It's a story about who actually shows up when you've got nothing left to offer anybody. I live in a 3-bedroom house off FM 762 in Rosenberg, Texas. The kind of house where the porch paint's been peeling for 2 summers, and the gutter's been hanging loose since a storm knocked it down, and I never got around to fixing it, because fixing it costs money I didn't have. It was a hot Tuesday evening in late July, when Caroline's phone rang at the table, while I was sorting through a stack of mail I already knew I didn't want to open. A past due notice from Centerpoint Energy, a fat envelope from the insurance company that never means good news when it comes in that thick. I watched her face change the second she saw the caller ID, like somebody had reached behind her eyes and flipped a switch. "Richard, honey, tell me everything." She actually turned her whole body away from me, rotated like I was a draft she needed to shut a door against. She walked into the living room so she could hear him better. A $12 million account, apparently, from some deal he'd closed. "I'm so proud of you, baby. You get that mind for business straight from my side of the family." I sat there and listened to my own wife talk to our son, like he'd just cured something instead of closed a sale. When she finally hung up, the smile dropped clean off her face, like she'd taken off a mask she only wore for him. She slid the Centerpoint bill across the table at me without looking up. Didn't ask about the cough. Didn't ask how I was feeling, even though I'd mentioned it twice that week already. "Fix this," she said, before they cut it off again. Like I was the problem in this house. Like I was the leak. I won't sit here and make myself out to be some blameless man wronged by fate. 10 years ago, I wasn't the deadbeat Richard likes to describe at dinner parties. I was a small-time real estate investor, and I was good at it. Good enough that I bought 60 acres out past Simonton because I'd read the county planning documents closer than anybody else bothered to, and I knew the Grand Parkway expansion was coming through that corridor eventually. Everybody who knew me said I was smart. Then a pipeline ruptured on the property next door, crude oil bled straight into the water table, and my 60 acres got locked under a federal cleanup order before I ever broke ground. Couldn't sell it. Couldn't build on it. Couldn't do a single thing except keep paying the property taxes and watch 10 years of banking relationships evaporate. My credit lines got pulled inside a month. My business partner walked without so much as a goodbye. And through all of it, Caroline never once asked if I was okay. Only ever how I was going to fix it. I've driven a forklift at a distribution warehouse ever since. 6 days a week, smelling like cardboard dust and diesel exhaust by the time I get home. Somewhere in the middle of those years, my son turned 21 and decided I had personally ruined his life by not funding a spring break trip to Destin with his fraternity brothers. He never really forgave me for that. I think, if I'm honest, he needed a villain in his story, and I was standing right there, convenient and already bleeding. My daughter is different. Melissa is 26. She teaches 4th grade in Katy, and she was 16 when the spill happened. Old enough to actually remember what our family lost, but young enough that she watched me try to rebuild instead of just mourning what was gone. 2 nights after that phone call about Richard's account, she showed up at my door with a foil pan of chicken and rice, heavy on the cumin, my favorite since she was a little girl watching me cook it. She didn't mention money, didn't mention her brother's millions. She set the pan down on the counter, kissed the top of my head and said, "You're seeing Dr. Ferris on Thursday. Don't argue with me about it." Dr. Ferris wasn't smiling when he walked back into the exam room 3 days later. "The mass on your lung is operable," he said. "That's the good news, but it needs to come out soon. We're talking weeks, not months." Then the billing coordinator came in right behind him with a clipboard and told me my insurance had a coverage gap and I'd need $3,500 up front before they'd even book the operating room. I sat in my truck in that parking lot for a long time, running the math 6 different ways in my head. It came out the same every time. I told myself I wouldn't call Richard. I lasted 2 days before I broke that promise to myself. He picked up on the 4th ring, and I could hear glasses clinking behind him, a woman laughing, somebody mentioning a bottle of Macallan like it was nothing. "Dad, can this wait? We're celebrating the Hendricks account tonight." I told him everything anyway. There was a pause on the line long enough that for one stupid, hopeful second, I thought maybe. Then his voice went flat and cold. "I just spent 10 years digging myself out of the hole. Your bad investments put this family in. You brought this on yourself, Dad. You always do. I've got a reputation to protect now, and I can't keep carrying your dead weight." The line went dead before I could even respond. I called Caroline next. "Don't you dare ruin this for him," she snapped at me. "He worked hard to get away from your mess. Emma's got a stable job, doesn't she? Go ask her." Emma, my daughter's name is Melissa. 31 years of marriage, and my wife still couldn't be bothered to get our daughter's name right when it mattered. 2 days after that call, I met Melissa at a diner off Highway 90. I hadn't planned on telling her about any of it. She knew before I got 2 sentences out. She reached into her bag and set an envelope on the table, then turned her phone screen toward me so I could see it. A payday loan notification. Approved. $1,500 at whatever brutal interest rate those places charge. "There's $2,000 cash in there too," she said. "I sold the Civic this morning. I told her she couldn't do that it was too much, that I'd figure something else out. Cars can be replaced, Dad," she said, and she grabbed my hand across that sticky diner table and held onto it while I cried in front of the entire lunch crowd, not caring who saw. They wheeled me into pre-op at 6 in the morning 11 days later. The last thing I remember before the anesthesia pulled me under was Melissa's face close to mine, still in her work clothes because she'd come straight from grading papers the night before. "You're going to be fine, old man," she said. "I already told the nurses you're stubborn as a mule, so they know what they're dealing with." I woke up 11 hours later with clean margins on the pathology report and one promise sitting heavy in my chest. I'm going to make this right, however long it takes me. I spent the next 2 weeks recovering on Melissa's pull-out couch in her 1-bedroom apartment. There was a bus schedule taped to her refrigerator with a Katy Independent School District magnet, right next to a photo of the 2 of us at a 4th of July picnic from years back. She was out there waiting for a city bus at 6:40 every single morning because she'd sold her own car to help pay for my surgery, while Richard drove a leased Audi to a steakhouse to celebrate a commission. Every afternoon she came home still in her teacher clothes, checked my incision without making a production of it, heated up something simple for dinner, and never once brought up the car again. Richard gives because he wants credit for it, I remember thinking one night, watching her fall asleep sitting straight up in a kitchen chair because she was too tired to make it to her own bed. Melissa gives because it never even occurs to her to think of it as giving. 16 days after the surgery, the mail carrier actually knocked on the door instead of just leaving everything in the box, because there were 2 certified letters that needed a signature, one from Cornerstone Golf Development, one from the EPA. I almost set them both on the counter unopened, because 10 years of nothing but bad news had trained me not to hope for anything different. But something made me sit down at Melissa's little kitchen table and tear open the EPA letter first. Remediation status, complete. Site officially released from federal oversight. 10 years of waiting, settled in 1 paragraph of government language. The second letter was an offer from Cornerstone. My worthless, poisoned swampland, now rezoned commercial, sitting less than half a mile from a brand new highway interchange. $15 million. Cash. 30-day close. I read that number about 20 times before it started to feel real. I didn't whoop. I didn't call anybody right away. I just sat very still, looked up at that bus schedule taped to Melissa's fridge, and thought about her standing out there right now in the July heat, waiting on a bus, while I sat in her kitchen holding $15 million in my hands. I didn't call Caroline. I didn't call Richard. I called Larry Foster, the one man who'd handled my affairs since before the spill, and never once stopped returning my calls even in the years I had nothing to offer him. I told him everything, and then I asked him to pull one more document. A partition and exchange agreement Caroline had signed 5 years earlier, Richard's idea at the time, meant to protect her from any of my remaining debt. Larry read it back to me over the phone. Caroline had waived, released, and forever discharged any future claim to that land, regardless of cause. She'd taken the house and her personal accounts as separate property. I'd taken the land, and anything that ever came from it, as mine alone. Richard had signed it himself as a witness. He'd told his mother at the time it was the smart move. I want to move on the cornerstone offer, I told Larry. Quiet. Not a soul finds out until it's done, especially not Caroline and Richard. I told him to set up an irrevocable trust in Melissa's name, the entire $15 million, once my own debts were cleared. Larry paused on the line. The whole thing, Boris? She sold her car for me, I said. She rode a city bus at 6:40 in the morning, so she'd have a place to bring me home to heal. My son told me to ask the hospital for a payment plan while he was ordering $300 scotch. Fair already happened, Larry. It happened 3 weeks ago in a diner off Highway 90, and only one of my 2 children showed up for it. 8 days later, somebody pounded on Melissa's apartment door like they meant to take it off the hinges. Richard hadn't heard it from me. He'd found the sale sitting right there in the Fort Bend County Commercial Property Registry. Public record, plain as day. He came in with Caroline right behind him. No mention of my surgery, no mention of the scar still tender under my shirt. You sold the land, $15 million. You've had this for 9 days and you didn't call your own son? Last time I called you, I said, you were at Perry's Steakhouse celebrating a commission while I sat alone in a hospital parking lot trying to figure out how to afford my own surgery. You told me it wasn't your problem anymore. I didn't feel much need to call you the second something good happened either. Richard started rewriting the whole history right there in Melissa's living room, accusing me of hiding a fortune from the family, of letting his mother drive around in a 10-year-old Camry while I sat on riches, of favoring Melissa on purpose out of spite. Caroline called me vindictive, cruel, stingy. Stingy, from the woman who told me to go ask our daughter for cancer surgery money instead of the son sitting on $12 million. Then Richard got to the real reason he'd come pounding on that door. Caroline was filing for divorce in the morning, financial abandonment, his lawyer already drafting a motion to freeze every account tied to the land sale. You hid marital assets, Dad. That's fraud. My lawyers are going to bury you. He slammed his fist down on Melissa's kitchen table, the same table where she'd once slid me an envelope without a second thought. I stood up slowly and reached into my jacket. I slid the partition agreement across the table to Caroline first, and watched the color drain straight out of her face as she read her own signature. You signed away any future claim to that land, regardless of cause, 5 years ago, on Richard's advice, just to keep your own hands clean of my debt. Then I slid Melissa's bank statement across to Richard. $12, that's what was in your sister's account, because she sold her car and took out a payday loan at 22% interest so I could get on an operating table, while you were 3 states away drinking Macallan and calling it a celebration. I told them both the trust was already finalized, irrevocable. The full $15 million already sitting with Melissa's name on it. Larry had already paid off her predatory loan in full, paid off her apartment building outright, funded the after-school tutoring program she'd been dreaming about starting for years, and there was a car waiting for her nicer than the one she'd sold to save my life. I didn't hide this to be petty, I told them. I kept it quiet because I needed time to make sure it went to the one person who'd actually earned it. And even if I'd known about the money sooner, none of it would have changed a single thing. You two divorced yourselves from this family a long time ago. You just hadn't gotten around to the paperwork yet. Nobody said a word. For the first time in 31 years of marriage, Caroline didn't have anything to say back to me at all. Richard just stood there staring down at that bank statement like it might somehow rearrange itself into different numbers if he looked long enough. Get out of my daughter's home, I said, quiet and final, and I meant every word of it. They left without slamming the door behind them, without a single last word thrown over their shoulders. 2 people realizing in real time that Richard's own clever legal maneuver, the one he'd been so proud of 5 years earlier, had locked them both out of a fortune neither of them would ever get to touch. Melissa stood in the doorway a long while after they'd gone, watching the street through the screen. Dad, you didn't have to give me all of it. Yeah, I said. I did. I put my arm around her shoulders, careful of my ribs where the incision was still healing, and we stood there together a long minute in that little apartment she wouldn't need much longer. Not because she was losing it, but because for the first time in her whole life, she was finally getting more than she'd ever thought to ask anyone for. Cars can be replaced, she'd told me that day in the diner, sliding an envelope across a sticky table like it was nothing at all. You can't. Turns out I couldn't be replaced either. Not to her. And somewhere across town that same night, my son sat alone trying to figure out how he was going to explain to his partners that $12 million wasn't nearly enough to save him now, because there wasn't a single soul left in his corner willing to try.